Centuries ago, in the dark and violent era of medieval Europe, there lived a king whose name few dared to speak aloud. He was feared not for his armies, not for his power, but for his twisted desires. The people would only whisper his title, the most perverted king in history. Childhood of darkness. From a young age, this king showed signs of cruelty. At just 10 years old, he was already torturing animals in the royal gardens, plucking the wings off birds just to watch them suffer. He forced peasant children to fight each other for his amusement. While other children played with toys, he played with fear and pain. When his father died, he inherited the throne at a young age. Many hoped his cruelty was just a phase. But when he became king, it grew even worse. His darkest fantasies became law. The Chamber of Pleasure. His very first command was to build what he called the Chamber of Pleasure. But it was no place of joy. The chamber was a dungeon of nightmares, black walls, iron chains, sharp hooks, and pits of fire. Here, the king would imprison men and women for days, deprive them of food, and force them into twisted games. Survivors said the king would sit in the shadows, watching, smiling, as if human suffering was his greatest entertainment. No one ever left that chamber unchanged. The cursed feasts. The king also hosted grand feasts that became infamous across the land. At first, the invitations seemed like an honor. The tables overflowed with golden cups, roasted meats, and barrels of wine. But when the night grew darker, the feast turned into a nightmare. The king would suddenly command the music to stop. Soldiers would chain some of the guests, while others were forced to fight each other like wild animals. The screams of the victims echoed through the palace. To the king, this was not horror, it was music. He would raise his goblet, filled with red wine, or perhaps blood, and laugh as his guests begged for mercy. A palace of nightmares. Even the palace itself reflected his madness. His throne was said to be decorated with human bones. His chairs were made from human skin. He drank from goblets carved from skulls, and decorated the halls with paintings made from blood. His collection of torture devices filled entire chambers. For him, every scream, every tear, every drop of blood was a form of art. Obsession with death. The king's darkest obsession was death itself. He loved watching his victims tremble. Sometimes, he would gather entire villages and force them to watch brutal punishments. Even his own soldiers were not safe. If he suspected disloyalty, they were tortured in front of the crowd as a warning. Fear ruled the kingdom. No one dared to speak against him, because those who did vanished, never to be seen again. The people prayed for deliverance, but none came. The fall of the king. But power cannot protect even the most feared ruler forever. One night, the king decided to test the loyalty of his own guards. He dragged them into the Chamber of Pleasure and ordered them to endure his twisted games. But this time, something changed. The guards, hardened by years of serving under his cruelty, snapped. Rage filled their hearts. They turned on the king. In the very chamber where he had tortured so many, the guards struck him down. Their swords tore through the tyrant who once seemed untouchable. His laughter turned into screams, and for the first time, he was the victim. When dawn came, the throne was drenched in blood, and the king's body was unrecognizable. Legacy of fear. The people celebrated his death as if it were a holy day. The streets filled with joy, songs, and relief. The nightmare was finally over. But the story of the king lived on. Even centuries later, his name was never written in the history books. The rulers that followed tried to erase him, to hide the shame of such evil. But the people remembered. They whispered his story to their children, warning them of the darkness that power can bring. And sir, he remains in memory, not as a great leader, not as a warrior, but as something far worse. To this day, he is remembered as the most perverted king in history.